with the backing of the UN, were trying to bring about or piling on pressure on the president and his deputy to have some form of coming together so that we can ease political tensions in the country. So that's the point at which we shall start. And just to remind you who our guests are this morning, we have Joy Brenda Midibo, who's an advocate, we have Mark Bitati, a communication consultant, as well as youth policy analyst, Gloria Oroba. Now, I'll give this one over to you, Gloria. What do you think of the promise of a reconciliation between the executives?
I believe it's about time.
Yeah.
I believe it's about time that they sort out their differences, or agree to disagree and just, part ways so that we are not in this confusion, even as citizens, wondering, so, are we in this thing together? Do we still have the Big Four agenda? Are we still ensuring that we are going through the manifesto and, trying to deliver those promises? There has to be a conversation around that. And it's clear that without that, without addressing the issue, which we have seen the president sidelining the deputy president. We have seen the deputy president coming out in public and talking about that there has been a sort of hiccup in the delivery of the promises that they have. He's talked about the construction project with the housing and how they're not even making headway because now that has been put aside and we are now focusing on BBI. So of course, the issue between the president and the deputy president, we can't say that we are fine, we'll move forward. There is interference in government, and which I always say I credit it to the handshake, which we don't really understand what were the dynamics of it and, what was supposed to come out of it. Because if it was about national unity and bringing all ethnic groups together and bringing on political parties together, that clearly was not the results of the handshake. If anything, the handshake, the results of it were more confusion, the dragging of these projects that were being promised to us, and just a heightened political atmosphere. So I really hope that the president has finally come to his senses and he's finally not listening to the people around him, because I believe the people around him have been misadvising him. And I think since the international community has actually come in and said, okay, now, we've had enough of expectation and we need for this economy to stabilize. We need for this country to appear as though we are heading towards a positive direction. And now the president, I believe, has no choice but to have a sit down with his deputy because he is the president. Okay. He has to call for that sit down. And then they have to figure out where they want to go. If they part ways, they should also inform us so that we can know what's going on.
You did speak of a breakup. I think one of the parties was actually just ghosted. Now, Joy, I want you to bring on your your opinion on this one. When it comes to a reconciliation, there has to be some form of compromise. And we do know that while there's talk of this reconciliation, the allies have been digging in their heels and saying there is no such thing happening or probably going to come forward in the near future. Meanwhile, the clergy people who have been entrusted with this apparently are quite tight-lipped on what is happening behind the scenes. So, Joy, what sort of compromises would you expect to see happen if, in fact, we do have a reconciliation?
When you say reconciliation, I'm tempted to go the meme way and just say, Olisiawa. Okay. There is nothing like a reconciliation that is coming up, judging by the headlines we saw yesterday. And I agree with Gloria. If it's a breakup, it's time it's made formal. But reconciliation, when I looked at the headlines yesterday, I realized that reconciliation is very far from the offing because, like you've correctly said, there are some hardliners within the handshake team that have said, you know what, there's no room here for the deputy president. And from the tone and the body language that we have seen also from the deputy president, he's not in the mood to play Kalungo. He's gotten to a place where he's decided, you know what, I'm also doing my thing. So reconciliation, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's one of those situations where they're bound together by law. They must work together. There is nothing that either of them can do about it without affecting their work. So they have of necessity to work together until 2022. They must finish the journey together. But that said, the division is clear. The lines are clearly drawn. The hardliners in all camps have clearly indicated, you know what, there's no room for this. And even me, if I was in ODM's shoes, I would be pretty, anxious I mean, we have a handshake, and then now you want to bring in another handshake.
Yeah.
You've seen what our handshake has done to the other party. What are you trying to tell us? So the president is walking a tightrope on this one if we're talking about reconciliation. What I think would be possible, and what I see would be within the realm of possibility, is a form of a ceasefire.
Okay.
Some civility being negotiated, where we're like, you know what, okay, fine. Here are the lines, let's not cross here, here, here. But you know what, everybody just carry on. But a reconciliation, I'm not sure that we are at that point, because if the pronouncements and the activities of the last few months are anything to go by, there's been a schism in the National Assembly. Another fissure was opened up in the Senate. We have seen what has happened within the party Jubilee to an extent where party officials are telling the deputy party leader, you cannot come to Jubilee. Right. I think if you talk about a reconciliation, this is of, there's too big a rift to just be, one round of coffee and tea in a hotel room is going to solve. So I think we can realistically hope for a ceasefire, but not a reconciliation. I don't see that happening.
Okay. Now, Mark, when we continue to speak about this particular subject, the paper is painting a quite stark picture of the DP, an angry man. And of course, when you look at some of the things that have happened to him or his allies, one would be tempted to say it might be justified, his sentiments, his feelings towards the establishment. But then what is your position on this situation and the possibility? Do you agree over reconciliation? Do you agree with Joy that this is not something that could happen? Perhaps just a ceasefire?
Trix, I happen to have the privilege of having a personal assistant.
Okay.
Now, my personal assistant has a singular job. It is to assist my person. And sometimes that involves him sitting in a meeting, and sometimes it involves him sitting outside the meeting. Whether he's inside or outside the meeting, his loyalty to me should be unquestionable.
Okay.
My question to you is, what was expected to happen when a sitting deputy president can go to Kisii, and I'm just using the most recent example, and say that the reason why the construction of 500,000 houses has not occurred is because the president shook hands with Raila, saying basically that the president cannot think, talk, and chew gum and walk at the same time.
Right.
That the president can only have one agenda at a time. That is an insult to the IQ of the head of state, but also is completely false. Because we know that there is a court case that literally stopped that project in its tracks. Now, unless the president, in doing the handshake, took himself to court to stop the building of those houses, then let's have a discussion.
Yeah.
But having laid that foundation, I then have a greater opportunity to give an objective view to our viewers. We must understand that if you're going to oppose BBI, and how I wish there was opposition to BBI, that was based on the merit of thought. You cannot replace the 9 points of the BBI, of the unity of the country, of the reconstruction of the IEBC, of shared prosperity, with the narrative of wheelbarrow economics balanced out with the narrative of hustler versus dynasty. How is that the intellectual challenge to BBI? I wish the no campaign that is slowly forming had a bit more thought into the policy and direction they want this country to have. We act as though wheelbarrows are a recent innovation. We are playing with this country. Secondly, we must understand that the narrative of dynasties, the narrative of hustlers is what Chairman Mao used to get into power in China. And I can tell you, between 40 and 65 million Chinese died because of that narrative. Lenin and Stalin, between them, killed 3 times more than Adolf Hitler killed. And both of them.
But Mark, one would argue that those are very different political situations compared to Kenya.
Dividing the people according to wealth is the most dangerous thing you can do. Ask the people of Zimbabwe, when they kicked out the farmers who had big farms because they were dynasty. Ask them how many of them faced starvation when the hustlers took the streets and took over their lives and property.
Okay, Gloria, would you care to chime in?
Yeah, I would like to say, first of all, back to his personal assistant, because he's aiming to say that the deputy president should have political obscurity, which we have seen him practice. But at what extent? At what extent? At the point where now the lives of the people who voted you in are actually being lost because of that political obscurity, it is your moral authority to then stand up and say, then, this government, whatever they're doing at this moment, as much as I'm a part of it, I'm not going to stand for that. So political obscurity, at one point, you must be able to differentiate that with the human rights, with defending human rights, with actually coming out and saying, these people who voted for me, they voted for me for a reason. So allegiances at one point have to end. Now, when he's talking about wheelbarrownomics, that we cannot now start, it's neither here nor there.
Yes.
I want to remind him that BBI has a 9-point agenda. And in that 9-point agenda, if indeed the BBI drivers of this initiative are truly honest with what they're trying to achieve, one of it is under shared prosperity. Now, I have read the document. I don't know whether Pichachi has read the first document, but they have clearly stated in that document that they want to push for an economic revolution that is on the basis from the bottom up to create jobs for the youth.
Yes.
They want to push for surge in entrepreneurship. So now when he's talking about we don't need wheelbarrows or water tanks or this or that, what is he saying? Because these are equipment that are used to set up enterprises, small traders enterprises that are going to push for this surge in entrepreneurship, which ideally is the economic revolution that BBI is trying to push.
Okay.
So, you can't be speaking both things. You have to first understand, if you're pushing for BBI and truly the 9-point agenda that BBI is was presenting to us in the first BBI, and if you truly believe that we have to get to a place where we are talking about issues that affect the Mwananchi, that affect the 50 million Kenyans and not the 5 or 6 people in a room, in a handshake, then you have to understand what you're pushing for.
Yes.
And BBI is pushing for shared prosperity.
Okay,
so when you see people getting capital to start businesses, then you must understand that that is actually a form of job creation, which is pushing the economic side that your BBI is stabling.
Okay,
Tricks.
Joy.
10 seconds. Tricks, if the BBI proposes wheelbarrows as a form of economic revolution in this country, I will vote no.
Okay, Mark, I think we shouldn't
BBI
reduce the whole entire...
It doesn't really bring down. In fact, all the words that are being used in BBI is things like we shall encourage, we will hope for. They don't really put a clear cut. Like when they're talking about economic shared prosperity, they're not telling us how do we create these jobs. So please do not castigate those who are creating jobs, and yet you're coming with a policy.
Joy, I'd like your sentiments on this one. Should we be reducing the hustler movement to just the distribution of wheelbarrows? I think there's a bigger ideology to that, whether or not we support it or, whatever our stance. Your views.
I think one of the things that comes out of this hustler narrative and what we have had Mark talking about and other political commentators is about the wheelbarrownomics. But I agree with you. If I look at it from a perspective of an observer,
yes,
you would see that it is an identity that is being created, where you either choose to belong to the hustler nation or you choose not to belong to the hustler nation. And so you find the way this ideology is being crafted, the easiest way is to talk about the guys with the wheelbarrows. But I've had conversations with guys, cab drivers, who are like, you know what, we the hustlers.
Yes.
You move over to another office and they're like, yeah, it's talking about we the hustlers. So it's become an identity thing. And it's gotten to a place where if you identify with the ideology, then you call yourself a hustler. And so I've seen some people who are not even poor at all, referring to themselves as hustlers. And in equal measure, I've seen some people who I would consider to be in the hustler bracket, who are very resistant to being labeled as hustlers.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, forget about the wheelbarrow and the non-wheelbarrow. This has gotten to a place where we are talking identity now. And that's why one of the things that I've come to realize when I look at this hustler movement thing, it's gotten to a place where people who want to even, who are not part of, like you've seen Honorable Raila coming out and saying, even when my father was a poor man, I could, might as well be a hustler.
Yeah.
So forget about the wheelbarrows. It's starting to be, it's an identity thing.
Yes.
It's a belonging. It's
Yes.
a sense of belonging. And this is the sort of thing that now grows into a movement. We've come to a place where I think people are choosing to, it's an us versus them. So they put here hustlers on one side and dynasties on the other. The thing that you need to realize is that this used to be the space that Honorable Raila Odinga used to occupy a few years ago. He's the one who used to be able to marshal the masses and say, you know what, I'm speaking for you. But with the handshake, it seems like he moved to the high table and a vacuum was left. And the deputy president very cleverly notices that there's a gap here and he has slid into that DM and he has relabeled it hustler and he has occupied that space. So if we look at it purely in terms of wheelbarrow, I think as a political analyst, as a governance expert, is one of those things where we would lose the plot. So if I was where Mark is sitting right now, I'd be telling my client, you know what, look at this more as a movement, because if you just look at the wheelbarrows, you miss the point.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, what is happening is that people are being given an identity and they're being told there is room here, you can belong.
Right.
And that is what people are resonating with. And we've come to a place where I think ideology in Kenya is very difficult to craft. This is a place to start because we are used to personality politics. But maybe this is one of those times when maybe there might be some form of ideology. It's not even political ideology, it's an economic ideology.
For sure.
But that being said, I wish also that the government of the day and the politicians of the day would be alive to the fact that there are very many Kenyans who feel excluded. And we keep saying that the BBI is going to improve this. But what if what we are seeing with the Hustler Nation is anything to go by, is they're not buying the narrative of more people at the top will create more room for us at the bottom. So I think even as we are pushing for BBI, that aspect of shared prosperity that Gloria is talking about, and the other salient needs when we talk about the national ethos, when you're talking about issues of dealing with corruption, it has to be in a way that affects Mwananchi where he is.
And appeals
because I think
to them
people
as
are
well.
tired of seeing it up in the air, it's a pie in the sky.
Yes, yes.
It's a time to cascade it to where they are. And that's when you see when the president is launching projects like he goes to Umoja or he goes to the place where they're crashing the quarry stores and stuff like that. Such optics actually people resonate with.
Yes, that
But
is
when
true.
he's calling people to State House and he has the big tent and everything, guys are like, look at them up there eating all our money. So
All
I
right.
think that time has come where the connection with the masses must be more deliberate. And I think the Hustler Nation thing, it's a thing now.
It is a
actually-
thing.
It's a thing.
Yeah. Now, Mark, before we run out of time, I'd like your comment on the reopening of schools. What do you think, how do you think we are doing on that front?
I think we lost the plot. I
Mark?
think we lost the plot.
Yes.
You know, one of the problems, real quick, sorry. One of the problems that I think we are seeing is that we've told kids to go back to school and we put in all these measures. So only 2 classes, for example, in primary school are back. They've already filled 3/4 of the school. Then we're saying in the next 2 weeks, we want the rest of the children to come back. And they're coming back. How? The number of private schools that have closed down, those children have nowhere to go. We have a conversation about examinations. Where have they registered? Where have they not? The plans by the Ministry of Health are not clear. They're not measurable. They're not smart. So we've come to a place where, yes, we're saying we've reopened schools, but if you look at it, it's like to what adventure? I'm on a board of a primary school, and some of our students have refused to come back. The parents are like, you know what? I don't want my child to come to school. Give him all this pressure until the 23rd of December. Give him more pressure in January than tell him he's sitting an exam in March, because he's had 1 year where he's gotten out of that zone.
For sure.
You're not going to crash my child with all this information for the sake of an exam.
Right,
A
and-
discussion is to be had.
Yes.
A discussion is to be had.
Yes, and I don't know if, Mark, you can hear me, but we're told one of the dailies all ready for grade 4, standard 8. That is as far as exams are concerned. What is your sentiment on that? And you think they're being crushed, as Joy has put it?
Well, of course, this is a very extraneous thing for our students, and they have to find a way of balancing between the need to have a calendar year move on in terms of school, and also the well-being, and not just in terms of tests, but also the psychological well-being of our students. This is extremely critical and extremely necessary. But allow me to digress a little bit, and I rarely do this, but I just want to disabuse this idea, this notion that the hustler nation, even though it's a thing, it's something that we need to continue to tolerate. And I am warning my country. Identity politics is the most dangerous thing you can play. Right now, the target is Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. Those are the dynasties. But I tell you, when push comes to shove, as it has done many times in Molo, as it has done many times across this country, it is your neighbor who has Anduthi and you don't have Anduthi, that is the dynasty. It is your neighbor who comes from the same tribe as the dynasty, that is the dynasty. That is the danger of this politics. Feel good the way you want, but I'm telling you for free, continue playing identity politics, panga ndo mtamalizana.
Okay. Now, Gloria, please do not go back to the hustler dynasty debate. Let's talk about schools. What do you think? How are we doing on that front?
So, you know, one of the projects that we have is centered in Kabiro Ward. I worked with underserved regions, and I was there earlier in the week. And I looked at that school. There's a school in Kabiro Ward, and I looked at the activities that were ongoing. Just the facility in itself, the lack of basic needs. They didn't have electricity. The rooms were dark. They didn't have water. In fact, the whole community there. I'm actually looking for the MCA for Kabiro Ward. It was, you know, they have a problem with the sewer. They forget water. It is completely horrible. But they were in uniforms, and we were trying to make do of what our cabinet secretary of education is saying, that they need to go back to school. So then they were back to school, but really what was happening is they were trying to figure out, why are we here? And from the activities that I saw, for me, it touched me to just think, this is the kind of facilities we have on an educational front. And yet we are busy running around chasing a Building Bridges initiative.
Right. We're
busy running around trying to chase political platforms of campaign for 2020, as opposed to looking at life after COVID, as opposed to going to the economic recovery. So when I hear the president having a cabinet meeting because he wants to sit down with the Senate and talk about whether they're going to launch BBI, I really just want to go to State House and stand there and catch his attention and take him to Kabiro Ward and show him that scoop. And have him understand that this is what us guys are dealing with. Indeed. When you guys are think about the 2022 succession politics. So for me, any conversation we're having around school or economic recovery or any activities post the pandemic that are not really touching on the lives of the private citizen, the underserved regions, I'm really not interested in.
Yes, Mark.
Tricks, allow me to correct a misnomer. It's completely wrong to assume that the Ministry of Trade and Industrialization does not have an economic recovery plan. It is completely fallacious just because we are lazy to read the newspapers to say that what is in the headline is the only thing that's happening in the country. Let me tell people, it is possible to chew gum and to cross the road at the same time. Let us stop pretending that we can only do one thing at a time. So if BBI is happening, there is no economic stimulus package. Now that we are giving wheelbarrows, we want to forget kuna kazi mtaani, there's cash transfer to the poor, there's a 14% VAT reduction. It is fine to criticize government, but don't assume that nothing is being done. Also, that same
to correct my opinion, I'll correct my opinion saying prioritize what the people need. Priority is that thing. And right now, it is not a priority to push for BBI. It is not a priority to push for anything that is not touching on economic recovery, on our schools, on our children going back to school, on basic needs, things that actually affect people during the pandemic.
Now, Joy, as our de facto referee,
let me help you out.
You know,
these two are bringing their grudges from the Sunday show to terrorize the rest of us here. But let me just point out that one of the things that as Kenyans we need to become serious with is, you're talking now about children going back to school. Remember, I was talking about putting some thought in the process.
Yes.
I think we need to come to a place where, for example, the president's legacy, part of his legacy, is the war on graft. It's been more than the time allocated to the EACC to tell us what happened with KEMSA. Now, that's a conversation that Kenyans are interested in having.
Indeed.
We are coming to a place where even in the BBI, we are talking about fighting graft. and we are talking about, is there money, the capitation money for children to go back to school this year? Where has it gone? That's where the conversation needs to be right now. I agree with Mark. We can be dealing with BBI on the side in the back burner. But what is current and urgent right now? For example, when I look at the children going back to school, we have not seen any infrastructure development in public schools. So you want the children to go back and to social distance. We haven't even seen tents. Forget even about putting up brand new classrooms. Okay, then put tents and then put those desks that we saw in those tents.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm talking about. Can we see some progress? Like there's some thought being put in this
people-centered leadership
not just,
type of thing.
Giving people, because if we tell parents,
Joy, I'd have to cut you short.
And we have no money for them. We don't even have money for masks, but we want all these things. Guys haven't been working. Where are they supposed to get all these things? Because it's either that or you open schools without any restrictions. Let people just, Mungu atuchunge sisi sote.
Thank you very much, Joy. Brenda Midivo is an advocate. We have Gloria Oruoba, who is a youth policy analyst, as well as Mark Bichachi, our very opinionated regular on the show, who is a communication consultant. We're going to take a break. Remember, you can keep the conversation going on Twitter. Some of you have been rubbed in the wrong way by Mark Bichachi, but of course, we do welcome your views, whatever their inclination is. And on the next segment, we're going to have Brian Esteli bringing us the very latest in entertainment, and he